It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody, where each week we seek inspiration from great men and women to become the heroes and heroines of our own lives. And you are here with your hosts. I am Andrew Bernstein. You are Robert Begley. How you doing today, Robert?
Oh, Andy, I'm doing fabulous. So happy to be living in the 21st century, since philosophy today is less dangerous than it was back in the 12th century, where two thinkers and lovers faced adversity and paid a price unlike anyone else in history.
Yes, since we're talking about Peter Abelard and Héloïse d'Argenteuil, country France, and I should call you Robert, in honor.
Call me Robert today. Yeah.
Robert, yeah, you are Robert today.
So some themes, Andy. It's a story that if you don't know it, you're going to learn about it. Some of the themes that they face that we'd like to cover today. Why would somebody give up becoming, this is in the Middle Ages, 12th century, give up a large inheritance and knighthood in pursuit of becoming a philosopher? It's number one. And how does one deal with the forced separation of lovers? And then back then we know the church ruled. And so how do you defend yourself against charges of heresy? So he's born in Brittany, which is the northwest section of France. And Andy, he starts out, like I said, he's of a noble birth, and his father has a large inheritance, but Abelard is interested in logic. He loves reading and he loves debating. In many ways, Andy, he was Socrates in the 1100s, where there hadn't been anybody like a Socrates for more than 1,000 years. And he goes from one town to another, like Alexander. He says, "I conquered this area like Alexander," and
and he's arrogant too. He's got the arrogance to go with his
yes,
genius.
he has the arrogance, absolutely. And so, what do you think the reaction is? Just like Socrates, the youth flock to him, but the authorities, they're not really happy about this young guy coming in, and especially because the church, just to give the context here, Andy, the audience really needs to know how dominant the church was. You did not mess with them. You paid a price if you tried, and for the next 500 years, you'd still be paying a price if you tried. So that's the context of Abelard. Whereas Héloïse, she grows up in a convent. She wants to study. She wants to read. She's a scholar in her own right. She questions everything, which gets her into hot water a lot. And they basically tell her, good, go get out of here. And she moves in with a person said to be her uncle. This is in Paris now. This is just as Notre Dame is being constructed. So anyway, he invites, because she's precocious and she's studying, she's in her mid-20s around this time, and Abelard's in his mid-30s. So there's a bit of a gap. And chastity is his thing, Andy. Let's set the context. He's tempted, at least in the movie, Stealing Heaven. So I'm going to just do a quick plug. This movie, 1988, came out. It's a really good story. This is a different title, but it's called Stealing Heaven. The students set him up with with basically a prostitute, and she's laying naked next to him, and he's like, logic, reason is all that matters to me. I'm not getting caught up with this. Boom. And then he sees Héloïse, and she has been, her background, she has no qualms about lust, about, she has impure thoughts.
Yeah, what a woman. Yeah, what a woman she is.
Andy,
Yeah.
she's the first and only woman ever, right, to have impure thoughts in the convent. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Abelard writes, later on in life, they wrote these letters, these love letters. That's much of the documentation. He says, under the pretext of study, we spent our hours in the happiness of love, and learning held out to us the secret opportunities that our passion craved. And they were doing it everywhere, every room in the house. They would just, the uncle is out and they're just, they're going at it.
He's supposed to be their tutor, and he's tutoring her in different fields, obviously.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we have to emphasize here, Héloïse d'Argenteuil this is an extraordinary woman. I mean, she was, even as a young girl, she was brilliant. I mean, most women back then weren't trained in logic and in philosophy and and literature, and she was so smart. She was so highly intelligent that the nuns simply and then anybody else, they recognized it, and they give them credit. And her uncle Fulbert recognized this and hired Abelard, the genius of the age, to tutor her. So you give them credit; they recognized this teenage girl's genius, and she's a brilliant mind in her own right. So you could see why Abelard's this towering figure in the field of philosophy. They had they had so much in common, even given the age difference. You could see why they fell in love. And you're right. Abelard was like in his mid 30s. She was a teenager, right? He said he'd been chaste up until that time. That right? That he was a
Chastity
virgin.
was the rule. Yeah. He didn't want to risk his future as a philosophy teacher. And that could do it because the church has so much control. And so you needed to be pure. And then this woman comes into his life, Héloïse, and she completely takes him by storm. They're completely in love, everything about each other. Then there are some rumors that they're in love. Andy, imagine you're in the same house and you fall in love and you're having a lot of sex. It's really hard to contain that. Even, outsiders can kind of sense the before and after. And there were some rumors about this, which Abelard denied. They both kind of denied, but then boom, she gets pregnant. And that one you can't you can't
Right.
deny that.
Let me. You're right. I happen to have here, but just by coincidence, this is Will Durant, the Story of Civilization, Volume 4, The Age of Faith. Let me read briefly here from Durant, because he tells the story of their love brilliantly, and he quotes part of this is a quote from Abelard himself. The philosopher himself gives the frankest explanation of how it had come about. Durant, quoting now from Peter Abelard. It was this young girl whom I determined to unite with myself in the bonds of love. And indeed, the thing seemed to me very easy to be done. So distinguished was my name, and I possessed such advantages of youth and comeliness, that no matter what woman I might favor with my love, I dreaded rejection of none. Thus, utterly aflame with passion for this maiden, I sought to discover means whereby I might have daily and familiar speech with her, thereby the more easily to win her consent. For this purpose, I persuaded the girl's uncle to take me into his household in return for the payment of a small sum. He was a man keen in avarice and believed that his niece would vastly benefit from my teaching. The man's simplicity was nothing short of astounding. I should not have been more surprised if he had entrusted a tender lamb to the care of a ravenous wolf. Now Abelard's given an account that's not very flattering to himself. He's setting this up like he seduced this innocent young girl. She completely, in her letters, completely denied this. Right? She said, "No, it was mutual. We loved each other dearly and dearly." So Abelard goes on. Why should I say more? Abelard goes on. We were united first in that dwelling that sheltered our love, and then in the hearts that burned within us. Under the pretext of study, we spent our hours in the, yeah, this you mentioned this right now, in the happiness of love. Our kisses outnumbered our reasoned words. Our hands sought less the book than each other's bosoms. Love drew our eyes together. Unquote from Peter Abelard. So you can see the passion there, that the way these two loved each other. Now I'm guessing, given that they both loved learning so much, that they probably didn't spend all their time in bed. They probably were discussing probably were discussing philosophy and literature and such things. You can see that they were deeply in love.
So now the conflict arises. They're at the absolute apex of happiness, of love, of joy, of reasoning. Then once she's pregnant, the uncle finds out, and this is anathema. How could this happen under my roof? Well, if you're that blind, it could easily happen under your roof. Abelard has a couple of different options. He says, okay, how about we do this? Let's have a secret marriage because I want to show that I want to take care of this woman. She's dear to me. Eloise doesn't even want that. She's against marriage. It's too constraining. She's like, I want to be your mistress. I don't even want to be your wife.
Yeah, well, and we should point out here, Robert, Eloise is doing this from love for her man. You know how deeply in love with Peter Abelard she is, because she knows, like you said before, the church expects chastity from its professors, from its philosophers. And if they get married publicly and they know he's married, then that undermines his opportunities in his career. That's why she's let's have a secret love affair. She's trying to protect her man.
And she does not care. That does not scare her one bit. But her uncle is not happy, and he has power. And although he allows the marriage to happen, somehow the secret marriage, somehow word gets out. And now he's starting to lose his reputation. What's happening under your roof? You can't even do that. He was a businessman. His business is starting to collapse. So he wants to take revenge on Abelard. And unlike anybody else, Andy, we know philosophy is a dangerous, it's dangerous. It killed Socrates. It almost killed Aristotle. He had to flee for his life. But in a sense, I got to admit, personally, I think I'd rather face that than what happened to Abelard. I'll let you.
Oh yeah, thanks very much. But yeah, Flaubert, uh, yeah, when Abelard whisks Eloise away from his household, they're married, right? But he whisks her away because he was punishing her in various ways. Flaubert takes out his vengeance on Abelard. He hires a group of thugs to bust into Abelard's rooms when he's sleeping at night, and they castrate him. I mean, it's like horrifying. But they castrate Abelard. He not only does he risk being excommunicated, maybe even being burned as a heretic, but now he loses his masculinity to these thugs, sent by Eloise's uncle, which is horrible for any man at any time, but above all when you're so deeply in love with a woman.
Their stories captured in art throughout history, especially in paintings. And here's one of them having to part from each other. The sadness on her face, you can see, and he's looking. He's to your left, and he's like distraught himself. But the change that happens in their lives, Andy, is it's very typical of the era. She effectively moves into the convent where she grew up, and he goes into a monastery and becomes a monk. She gives birth to a child. What's the child's name? Astrolabe. I mean, are these people of their period or what? Like they are just so looking so far. They just love reason and logic and name their child after an instrument, a scientific instrument.
Because that's what they both loved. That was the foundation of their bond was intellectuality.
There was no other person for her. He was the ideal man. Her heart was basically, it was his. So in his life, he finds a way to continue on. He goes away from Paris and he goes out to different monasteries and he starts writing. And he writes a book, Sic et Non, which is yes and no, where he questions, tries to find rational explanations for the Trinity. Is God Holy Son and Holy Ghost? Are they three or are they one? And he's trying to make these logical connections here. A precursor to Thomas Aquinas, who came like right after him with that side. And then on morality, he's asking important moral questions. But he is recovering. He's slightly recovering his reputation. Then he runs into Bernard of Clairvaux, who is really one of the villains in the ancient world, complete mystic who ruled by faith and force, completely integrated the two of those. And they were supposed to have a debate, a public debate. And Clairvaux, Bernard knows that nobody can out debate Abelard, he arrives early and persuades all the clergymen. He reads some of the texts from Abelard's book, and they're not complete faith based doctrines. He's like, look, this guy is a heretic. And sure enough, Abelard shows up and they charge him with heresy and they burn his books. So Andy, Abelard himself says basically the castration wasn't the worst thing done to him. It was burning his own books, his own writing. So his mind, they're trying to destroy the effort of his mind. I mean, that's a bad choice to even have to make.
You have this towering genius, and look at what society in his society did to him in different forms, right? The thugs and the jealous uncle, castrated his body, and now the thugs of the church, castrate his mind. His life is torn apart
Yes.
because of his
Yes.
virtues. His profound love for Eloise and the deeply intense, intimate, romantic relationship they have. For that, his body is castrated. And then his genius in the field of philosophy and his passionate love for that, his mind is castrated. He's condemned. He comes close to being condemned as a heretic. Some of his books are burned. Some of his propositions are condemned. The Pope at one point condemns him to perpetual silence. The think about that. The consummate lecturer of his era is condemned to perpetual silence. He's not permitted to speak. I don't remember how long that lasted, but just the fact that the
Yeah.
Pope condemned him to the consummate lecturer, the most impeccable master of argumentation ever, and therefore the greatest teacher of his era, is condemned to eternal or perennial silence. Wow.
Andy, we asked her early on, like how when the church rules, how do you respond to the charges of heresy? He becomes a hermit for some time, and how do you deal with forced separation by the church? The two of them, they wrote to each other. Okay, they wrote these letters that would eventually be called love letters, but initially the first letter Abelard wrote was to a friend, and it was like a confession setting up the context. And that's where he does say that he seduced Eloise. And then she reads it and she's like, back up. No, 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 you're wrong about this, and this. So she's still challenging him. So this is one way that you cope in that era with being separated from your lover for so long. To my knowledge, they spent the rest of their days even separated, only saw each other a couple of times. Towards the last few years of Abelard's life, he was all the way east in France, far from Paris. Again, their story goes on after they died. First Abelard died, and then when Eloise died, they had the remains put together, and Josephine, who's Josephine, Napoleon's wife, was so intrigued and so inspired by the story, she puts them together in Père Lachaise. And of course, Père Lachaise is the most famous, possibly the most famous cemetery in the world. Way over on the side, there's this beautiful mausoleum with the two of them. And I was like, I didn't even know they were here. I knew their story. This is an act of justice. Thank you, Josephine Bonaparte, for uniting them for eternity together. We see this picture of the two of them.
Yeah, that's very touching.
Yeah, I agree, Andy. I think for me, in closing, I say, why do we celebrate this couple? And we're not the first. Hopefully there'll be many more people hearing about this story. But during an era of faith and force, Eloise and Abelard, they chose reason, love, independence, and happiness. Even if it was only for a short period of time within their lives, they were as happy a couple as recorded history for those 1,000 years or so that we know of.
And I want to quote in closing here, a line that is often ascribed to Shakespeare, but was actually composed by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And that is, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." And that is very poignant and very profound, because if you've lived your entire life and never loved the way Abelard and Eloise did, then you haven't fully lived. So despite all the pain and the tragedy that befalls these two, my guess is they would not have given up their love, even if they had known what the consequences would be. They would not have given this up, even though the end was so painful. The joy of the love for these two outweighed the agony of the atrocities and the horrible events that follow. This is what I think is so worthy of admiration, that they recognize. And in a religious culture that worship deprivation and renunciation, they celebrated love and life above, a full life of love above all else. And so I would like to think that for us, Robert, and for everybody out there in Hero Land, that the takeaways here, two takeaways. One, not everybody wants to be a professional philosopher, but philosophy is necessary in order to guide our lives. So that we undertake to study philosophy, and above all, the takeaway from Abelard and Héloïse is to seek out romantic love in the way that these two did and live life to the full. If I can quote Steve Martin from the film Roxanne, why sip from the teacup when we drink from the river? They lived and loved fully. And that's I think, is the greatest testimony to Peter Abelard and Héloïse d'Argenteuil. Despite all the horrors of this story, the way they overcame it to a great extent, to live in love and to accomplish at a very high intellectual level, this is inspiring. The takeaway from us, always for us on the Hero Show, to be inspired to be the heroes and heroines of our own lives. And in that, we will be back once again next week with more great stories about great men on the Hero Show. See you next week, everybody.